8:15 in the morning. The northern entrance of the Taiwan Strait. The aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln moved at 15 knots through a corridor of heavy gray water. This was not a routine transit. Deep in the hull of the lead destroyer, the USS Higgins, sonar technicians stared at a digital display that should have been empty. Instead, the screen crawled with sharp, rhythmic pulses. Why were active acoustic signatures appearing in the middle of a designated international shipping lane? The air on the bridge of the Abraham Lincoln was thick with the scent of salt and the low, constant vibration of nuclear reactors. To the west, the coast of mainland China remained a jagged line of haze. The strike group had been tasked with a standard freedom of navigation operation. To the east, the mountains of Taiwan stood silent under a layer of morning cloud. It was meant to be a statement of presence, but the ocean floor was no longer empty. It was speaking. Captain Miller stood at the center of the flag bridge. He watched the tactical plot as a series of red icons flickered into existence. 1, 4, 12, 24. The contacts formed a perfect semicircle across the mouth of the strait. They were spaced exactly 500 meters apart. This was a professional maritime blockade. Miller turned to his sensor officer. "Confirm the signature. Are these moored or drifting?" The officer did not look up from his console. "They are tethered, sir. Sensors indicate they are Chinese-made EM-52 captor mines. They are resting 300 feet below the surface. And, Captain, they are broadcasting. In naval warfare, a mine is usually a silent killer. It waits for the pressure of a hull or the magnetic signature of a passing ship. But these mines were different. They were chirping. They were announcing their presence to the American fleet. It was a physical barrier made of high explosives and computer logic. The Abraham Lincoln was the center of a massive naval formation. Behind it followed a cruiser, 3 destroyers, and a fast combat support ship. To stop a carrier strike group in the middle of a narrow strait is a logistical nightmare. To turn one around takes miles of sea room. Sea room they no longer had. "Sir," the tactical action officer called out. "New contacts. Surface. Bearing 180. Miller looked at the secondary screen. 4 Chinese Type 055 destroyers had just altered course from the southern horizon. They were moving fast. They were not shadowing the Americans anymore. They were closing the distance from astern. The American fleet was now positioned between a live minefield and a line of heavily armed warships. The Combat Information Center was a hive of controlled urgency. Every sailor knew the math. The Abraham Lincoln was over 1,000 feet long. It weighed 100,000 tons. If the carrier struck a captor mine, the explosion would be directed upward against the thinnest part of the hull. It would not just sink the ship. It would cripple the American presence in the Pacific for a generation. Miller picked up the internal handset. "Engineering. This is the captain. Bring us to 5 knots. All ships in the group. All stop. We are holding position." The massive propellers slowed. The wake of the carrier began to settle into a smooth, churning foam. On the horizon, the Chinese destroyers continued their approach. They showed no sign of slowing down. They were forcing the Americans toward the red icons on the screen. The captain looked out at the quiet water. Somewhere beneath that surface, hundreds of pounds of high explosives were waiting for a single mistake. The tactical plot showed the carrier was now less than 2,000 meters from the first row of mines. The trap was set. The door was closed. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 8:20 in the morning. The bridge of the USS Higgins. The lead destroyer sat 2,000 meters ahead of the Abraham Lincoln. Its sonar dome was pinging the water with intense frequency. Every return confirmed the same grim reality. The minefield was not a random scattering. It was a sophisticated, multi-layered defense. The sonar supervisor spoke into his headset. "Bridge. Combat. We have confirmed the density. These are not just tethered mines. We are detecting high-frequency pulses from the seabed. They are networked. If one is triggered, they all wake up." Commander Sarah Vance, the captain of the Higgins, gripped the edge of the bridge console. She looked through her binoculars at the churning water ahead. "Do we have a lane? Any gap at all?" The supervisor replied, "Negative. They have seeded the entire deep water channel. The only way through is the shallows, and we cannot take the carrier through the shallows. 5 miles to the south, the Chinese destroyer Nanchang sliced through the water at 28 knots. Captain Zhao stood on the bridge of the Nanchang. He was a veteran of 2 decades in the People's Liberation Army Navy. He watched the digital representation of the American strike group on his tactical screen. The massive blue icon of the American carrier had stopped moving. This was exactly what his orders intended. Zhao turned to his communications officer, signaled the American lead ship, use the international hailing frequency. The officer nodded. Yes, Captain. Sending now. A moment later, the radio on the bridge of the Higgins crackled to life. A voice spoke in clear, accented English. United States Navy ship. This is Chinese warship 101. You are approaching a high-risk maritime hazard zone. We are conducting deep-sea cable maintenance and explosive ordnance disposal. For your own safety, you must alter course immediately to the south. Do not proceed north. Commander Vance looked at the radio. Then she looked at the tactical plot. The south was exactly where the Chinese destroyers were positioned. If she turned the fleet south, she would be sailing directly into the teeth of a 4-ship surface action group. She keyed the handset. Chinese warship 101. This is USS Higgins. We are operating in international waters as defined by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Your minefield is an illegal obstruction to navigation. We demand you provide the coordinates for a safe passage lane immediately. There was a long pause. The static of the radio was the only sound on the bridge. Captain Zhao responded from the Nanchang. USS Higgins. We do not recognize your claim. This area is under temporary military restriction. We cannot guarantee your safety if you continue your current heading. If you do not turn south, you are choosing to enter a live fire zone. On the Higgins, the tactical officer called out. Mom, the Chinese destroyers are accelerating. They are at 30 knots. They will be within missile range of the Lincoln in 4 minutes. The box was getting smaller. The American ships were pinned against a wall of explosives, and the hammers were starting to move. The sonar pulses from the mines grew louder. It was a steady, heartbeat rhythm. A warning that the ocean was no longer neutral. 8:25 in the morning. The flag bridge of the USS Abraham Lincoln. Rear Admiral Miller stared at the primary tactical display. The red icons representing the minefield were no longer static. They were drifting. But they were not drifting with the current. They were moving against it. The Admiral turned to his Chief of Staff. Explain the movement. Those mines are tethered. They should be stationary. The officer adjusted the zoom on the glass table. Sir, they are not standard mines. Our Undersea Warfare Center just sent a flash update. These are the new U-6 intelligent mobile mines. They have small electric thrusters. They are repositioning themselves based on our hull signatures. The implications were staggering. The Chinese were not just blocking the path, they were actively shrinking the box. The minefield was crawling toward the American ships like a closing net. Miller looked at the map. They are forcing us into a corner. If we stay here, they will eventually surround us. If we move south, we sail into the Chinese surface group. If we move north, we hit the wall. 8:27 in the morning. The bridge of the Chinese destroyer, Nanchang. Captain Zhao watched the data stream from the underwater network. The smart mines were performing perfectly. They had detected the massive acoustic footprint of the American carrier. Now, they were swimming toward it. Zhao spoke to his executive officer. The Americans are paralyzed. They are used to projecting power through movement. Now, they have no room to move. It is a lesson in geography. The executive officer checked the range. The 2 destroyers on our western flank are now within 30 miles of the American screen. Should we transition to active targeting? Not yet, Zhao replied. We do not need to lock our radars. The mines are doing the work for us. We will maintain our intercept course. If they attempt to break out, we will be there to meet them. 8:30 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The room was dark. illuminated only by the blue and green glow of a dozen high-definition monitors. The air was cool and smelled of ozone. The sensor supervisor's voice was tense. "Admiral, we have a change in the acoustic state of the minefield. The chirping has stopped." Miller leaned over the console. "What does that mean?" "It means they have found what they were looking for," the supervisor said. "The mines have transitioned from search mode to terminal acquisition. They have a positive lock on the Lincoln's 4 propeller shafts." A heavy silence fell over the room. In naval terms, a terminal lock was the final step before a weapon was triggered. The strike group was no longer just being blocked. They were being targeted by hundreds of underwater warheads simultaneously. "Bridge. Combat," Miller said into his headset. "Launch the airborne mine countermeasures team. Get the helicopters in the air. Now." The roar of twin engines erupted from the flight deck as the first MH-60 Seahawk lifted off. It carried a specialized sonar pod and a rack of depth charges. It was the only shield the carrier had left. As the helicopter cleared the deck, the Chinese destroyers on the horizon suddenly changed their formation. They split into 2 pairs. One pair accelerated to 35 knots, heading for the eastern flank of the American fleet. The other pair moved west. The squeeze was no longer a threat. It was an active engagement. The American strike group was being encircled from above and below the water. The helicopter pilot's voice came over the command net. "Command, this is Raven 1-6. I have visual on the first line of mines. They are just below the surface. They are moving fast, directly toward the carrier." The admiral watched the timer on the screen. The closest mine was now less than 1,200 meters from the Abraham Lincoln. The situation was no longer about diplomacy. It was about survival. 8:35 in the morning. 200 feet above the Taiwan Strait. The pilot of Raven 1-6 gripped the collective. The MH-60 Seahawk hovered in a low, tight, stationary position. Below the rotor wash, the surface of the ocean was a churn of white foam. Through his polarized visor, the pilot could see the dark, pill-shaped hulls of the U-6 mines. They were less than 10 feet below the surface. They were swimming with a mechanical, predatory precision. The co-pilot checked the targeting sensor. They are inside 1,000 meters from the carrier. "Command, this is Raven 1-6. We have a clear track on the lead mine. Requesting permission to deploy neutralizing charges." On the flag bridge of the Abraham Lincoln, the request hung in the air. Rear Admiral Miller looked at the rules of engagement on his tablet. The instructions were clear for conventional threats. If a missile was launched, he could fire. If a torpedo was in the water, he could engage. But these were mines. Technically, they were passive obstacles. Even if they were moving, the legal definition was gray. "If we drop a charge on those mines," Miller said to his legal officer, "does that constitute the first shot of a war?" The officer looked at the screen. "Sir, the Chinese will claim we are attacking their sovereign property in international waters. But if that mine touches our hull, the Lincoln is out of the fight." Miller keyed the radio. "Raven 1-6, you are cleared to deploy neutralizers. Use the laser-guided depth charges. Precision only. Do not engage any surface or air targets unless fired upon." "Copy, Command," the pilot replied, commencing the run. The Seahawk tilted forward. The weapon bay doors began to cycle open. But before the pilot could release the charge, a deafening roar filled the cockpit. 2 Chinese J-15 fighters screamed past the helicopter at Mach 0.9. They were less than 50 feet away. The wake turbulence from the heavy jets hit the Seahawk like a physical wall. The helicopter bucked violently. The pilot struggled to maintain control as the air beneath his rotors vanished. "Braking! Braking!" the pilot shouted. "We are in a spin. The J-15s are buzzing us. They are trying to knock us into the water." Inside the Chinese destroyer Nanchang, Captain Zhao watched the maneuver on his primary radar. "Excellent timing," Zhao said. "Signal the American admiral again. Tell him that any attempt to destroy our scientific equipment will be viewed as an act of unprovoked aggression. Remind him that our destroyers have their fire control radars locked on his flight deck." 8:37 in the morning. The bridge of the USS Higgins. Commander Vance watched the Chinese J-15s through the bridge windows. They were circling back for another pass. They were flying dangerously close to the carrier's superstructure. It was a game of chicken played with billion-dollar machines. The J-15s are setting up for a high-speed intercept on our second helicopter, Vance reported. Ma'am, our phalanx systems are tracking them automatically. If they get any closer, the computer will open fire, override the phalanx. Miller's voice came over the net. Do not be the first to pull the trigger. We are holding the line. The air was vibrating with the sound of jet engines and the deep thrum of the carrier's own defense systems. On the water, the mines continued their slow, steady advance. They were now 900 meters from the Abraham Lincoln. The pilot of Raven 16 recovered from the spin. He was breathing hard. His heart rate was visible on the telemetry in the Combat Information Center. 140 beats per minute. Command. I am back on station, the pilot said. But the J-15s are coming back. They are dropping flares to blind my sensors. I cannot get a lock on the mines. The standoff had reached a stalemate of nerves. The Americans could not clear the mines because of the Chinese jets. The Chinese would not withdraw the mines because they wanted to force the Americans to retreat. 8:40 in the morning. The South China Sea. The Abraham Lincoln remained at a dead stop. To the world watching via satellite, it looked like a giant beast caught in a web. To the men and women on board, it felt like a ticking clock. The lead mine was now 800 meters away. It was no longer moving toward the propeller shafts. It was aiming for the midship, the most vulnerable part of the hull. They are not just trying to stop us, Miller whispered. They are trying to see if we have the stomach for a fight. 8:40 in the morning. The South China Sea. The Abraham Lincoln remained at a dead stop. A nuclear-powered aircraft carrier is designed for speed and power. At a standstill, it is a target. The massive hull drifted slightly with the current. To the sailors on deck, the silence was louder than the roar of the jets. The only sound was the occasional slap of water against the steel side of the ship. The lead mine was now 700 meters away. It moved with a slow and rhythmic pulse. It was a patient hunter. On the tactical screens in the Combat Information Center, the red icons had formed a solid line. The gap had vanished. The American strike group was officially boxed in. 8:42 in the morning. The bridge of the Chinese destroyer Nanchang. Captain Zhao watched the distance close. His ship was now only 12 miles from the American carrier. At this range, his supersonic anti-ship missiles could reach the Lincoln in less than 2 minutes. He could see the American destroyers through his binoculars. Their missile hatches were closed. Their guns were trained forward. Zhao spoke to his tactical officer. Prepare the final warning. If they do not start their engines and turn south in 3 minutes, we will activate the secondary mine layer. We will seal them in from behind. The officer hesitated. Captain, if we seal the exit, they will have no choice but to fight. That is the point, Zhao replied. They must choose between a humiliating retreat or a war they cannot win in these waters. The Americans always believe they have a third option. Today, there is no third option. 8:43 in the morning. The flag bridge of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The admiral received the report from the sensor deck. The Chinese destroyers were now radiating high-powered targeting energy. Their fire control radars were painting the American ships. It was the electronic equivalent of a finger on a trigger. Sir, the chief of staff said, the Nanchang just sent a burst transmission. They are giving us 3 minutes to turn around. After that, they are moving more mines into our wake. Admiral Miller looked at the countdown on the wall. 2 minutes and 40 seconds remained. He looked at the live feed from the helicopter. The smart mines were now less than 500 meters from the hull. They were accelerating. We cannot turn around, Miller said. The moment we start our engines, the acoustic signature will pull those mines straight into our screws. We will be dead in the water before we complete the turn. Then we have to kill the mines, the chief of staff said. Whatever the cost, Miller nodded. He keyed the fleet-wide circuit. All ships. This is the strike group commander. We are transitioning to a defensive posture. Destroyers Higgins and Dewey. You are cleared to engage the mines with your close-in weapon systems. Use the 30mm cannons. Do not fire on the Chinese surface ships unless they launch first. Copy, Admiral. The response came back instantly. On the deck of the Higgins, The heavy Gatling gun began to slew toward the water. It was a massive, robotic weapon capable of firing 4,000 rounds per minute. It was designed to shred incoming missiles. Now, it was being asked to hit a target beneath the waves. The gunner in the control room adjusted his joystick. The infrared camera showed the dark shape of the mine just below the surface. The water was clear. The target was bright. "Target acquired," the gunner said. "Opening fire." The sound was like a giant zipper being pulled apart. A stream of tracer rounds punched into the water. White geysers of spray erupted as the heavy shells impacted the surface. The rounds tore through the water, seeking the explosive core of the U-6 mine. Inside the Nanchang, the alarm sounded. "The Americans are firing," the tactical officer shouted. "They are engaging the mines." Captain Zhao gripped the railing. Status of the J-15 flight. "They are diving on the American destroyers now," the officer said. "They are going to suppress the gun positions." The two Chinese fighters banked hard. They dropped from 10,000 feet in a vertical scream. They were not using missiles. They were using their presence to intimidate the gunners. They flew so low that the spray from the Higgins splashed against their cockpits. The American gunner did not flinch. He kept his eyes on the screen. The tracers found the mine. A massive plume of water and black smoke erupted 500 meters from the Higgins. The shockwave rattled the windows of the bridge. The first mine had been neutralized, but there were 23 remaining, and the Chinese destroyers were now only 10 miles away. They were moving into a broadside formation. The clock was at 0. The buildup was over. The crisis was here. 8:45 in the morning. The Taiwan Strait. The detonation of the first mine sent a wall of white water 60 feet into the air. The shockwave slammed into the hull of the Higgins with the force of a physical blow. On the bridge, officers grabbed for handrails as the deck bucked beneath them. The sound was a deep, guttural roar that rolled across the surface of the strait like thunder. Inside the Chinese destroyer Nanchang, Captain Zhao did not hesitate. The Americans had used kinetic force. The rules of engagement had shifted. "The Americans have initiated combat operations," Zhao said. His voice was cold. "Illuminate the carrier. All ships in the group. Full radar lock. Prepare for a coordinated anti-ship strike." On the Abraham Lincoln, the electronic warfare suite began to scream. Every screen in the Combat Information Center turned blood red. "We are being painted," the tactical officer shouted. "Multiple fire control locks. Nanchang, Xiamen, Hohhot. They are all locked on us. High-frequency targeting energy detected." The admiral looked at the screen. The Chinese destroyers were less than 10 miles away. Their missile hatches were open. Each ship carried dozens of YJ-18 supersonic missiles. At this range, there was no time for a defense. 8, 45, and 30 seconds in the morning. The Higgins gunner shifted his aim. The second mine was now 400 meters from the carrier. He pulled the trigger. The 30mm cannon roared again. A line of tracers stitched the water in a blinding streak. Another explosion. Another plume of gray water. A third mine was closing from the port side of the carrier. It was moving faster than the others. "I cannot track it," the gunner said. "The J-15s are blocking my sensor." The two Chinese fighters were now flying between the destroyer and the mines. They were using their own airframes as physical shields. For the smart weapons, it was a suicidal maneuver. They were banking at 600 knots, mere feet above the wavetops. The turbulence from their engines was throwing the Higgins' aim off by precious degrees. 8:46 in the morning. The distance was closing. 300 meters. 250. The Abraham Lincoln was defenseless against a submerged threat at this range. The carrier's own defense systems were designed for air targets, not underwater drones. Admiral Miller picked up the fleet phone. His hand was steady. "All ships. This is the strike group commander. If the Chinese fighters do not break off, we are authorizing the use of surface-to-air missiles. Protect the carrier at all costs." The Higgins commander acknowledged immediately. "Evolved Sea Sparrow missiles are hot. We have a fire control lock on the J-15s. Ready to engage." The world was seconds away from a total kinetic exchange. One missile, one downed jet. That was all it would take to turn a standoff into a global war. Captain Zhao watched the American missile cells move on his own cameras. "They are going to fire," Zhao said. "Prepare for counter battery. Target the Lincoln's bridge and flight deck. If they take our pilots, we take their ship." The air was static with electricity. The sound of the jet engines was a physical weight on the chests of every sailor on deck. The lead mine was now 200 meters from the carrier's hull. It was traveling at 20 knots. It was aimed directly at the center of the nuclear reactor compartment. The Higgins gunner took a breath. He ignored the screaming jets. He focused on the dark shape under the water. He fired a 5-second burst. The water erupted in a line of white geysers, but the mine did not explode. It dove deep. It was no longer on the surface. It was going for the keel. The sonar technician in the carrier's hull screamed into his headset. Impact in 10 seconds. 9, 8. Admiral Miller stood straight. He looked out at the horizon. 7, 6, 5. Then, 8:47 in the morning. The Taiwan Strait. The Abraham Lincoln did not explode. At the count of 4, a massive acoustic wall slammed into the hull of the carrier from below. It was not the sharp, focused crack of a warhead. It was a deep, earth-shaking groan that vibrated through every deck and bulkhead. On the bridge, Admiral Miller felt the floor move beneath his feet. This was not a weapon. It was the ocean itself. Inside the Combat Information Center, every sonar screen went white with static. The technicians ripped their headsets off as a deafening roar flooded their ears. "Admiral," the sensor supervisor shouted, "seismic event. We just detected a magnitude 6.4 undersea earthquake. The epicenter is less than 10 miles away, right on the edge of the Okinawa Trough." The sheer volume of the acoustic energy released by the shifting tectonic plates was astronomical. To the delicate sensors of the smart mines, it was a blinding flash of noise. The U-6 mines, designed to track the subtle hum of a carrier's propellers, were suddenly overwhelmed. Their internal computers could not process the data. On the tactical plot, the red icons began to flicker and vanish. 8:48 in the morning. The bridge of the Chinese destroyer Nanchang. Captain Zhao was thrown against the command console as the ship rolled violently. A massive surge of water, displaced by the undersea shift, was moving through the strait. It was not a tsunami, but it was a powerful, concentrated swell that tossed the heavy destroyers like toys. "Status of the mine network," Zhao demanded, regaining his footing. The tactical officer was frantically typing. "The network is down, Captain. The acoustic surge has triggered the failsafe on every mine in the field. They have entered a dormant state. They are no longer tracking." Zhao looked out at the water. The J-15 fighters had pulled up into a steep climb to avoid the rising mist and spray. The tactical advantage had vanished in a heartbeat. The smart weapons were now just floating pieces of metal, blind and deaf. "Sir," the communications officer called out. "Emergency broadcast on the international hailing frequency. It is a commercial vessel, the Evergrande, a container ship. They are 3 miles to our west." 8:49 in the morning. A massive, blue-hulled cargo ship, nearly as long as the carrier, appeared through the haze. It was listing 10 degrees to the port side. The earthquake had caused its cargo of thousands of steel containers to shift violently. The ship was dead in the water, its steering gear shattered by the shockwave. It was drifting directly into the path of the Chinese surface group. "Mayday! Mayday!" A frantic voice came over the radio. "This is the Evergrande. We have lost power. We are drifting. We have over 100 crew on board. We are heading for the naval formation. Please, we cannot steer." The geopolitical standoff had just been interrupted by a humanitarian disaster. The Chinese destroyers were now in the direct path of an out-of-control 200,000-ton cargo ship. The Americans were trapped behind a field of dormant but still dangerous mines. Admiral Miller watched the drama unfold on the long-range cameras. The crisis had pivoted from a potential war to a chaotic struggle against the elements. "The mines are dumb now," Miller said to his staff. "But the Nanchang is about to be rammed by a commercial freighter. And if that container ship hits those mines while it is drifting, we are going to have an environmental catastrophe in the middle of a conflict zone." The admiral keyed his radio. He did not call his own ships. He called the Nanchang. Captain Zhao, this is Rear Admiral Miller. We are tracking the Evergrande. You are in its path. My helicopters are equipped with heavy tow cables. We can help you divert that ship. Do you copy? There was a long silence. On the other end, the static of the earthquake's aftermath was still fading. For the first time that morning, the two commanders were looking at the same problem. The ocean had reminded them that it did not belong to either side. Admiral Miller, Zhao's voice, came back. It sounded different now. Less like a warrior, more like a sailor. We copy. We are clear for joint maneuver. Do not fire on my pilots. They will assist your helicopters. The pivot was complete. The weapons were still hot, but the targets had changed. 8:55 in the morning. The center of the Taiwan Strait. The ocean was a chaotic landscape of whitecaps and deep, rolling swells. The earthquake had left the water in a state of violent agitation. The Evergrande, a blue wall of steel, loomed over the smaller warships like a collapsing skyscraper. It was drifting at 4 knots. It was heading directly for the Nanchang. Admiral Miller watched the flight deck of the Abraham Lincoln. 2 more MH-60 helicopters surged into the air. They were carrying heavy-duty nylon tow lines. The admiral spoke into the command net, Raven 16, Raven 17. You are the primary tow. Chinese J-15s will maintain a high-altitude combat air patrol to provide visual reconnaissance. Do not, I repeat, do not engage. On the bridge of the Nanchang, Captain Zhao watched the American helicopters approach. His officers were silent. The transition from target to partner was too fast for their training to process. Zhao turned to his executive officer. Tell our pilots to stay clear of the rotor wash. They are to act as eyes only. If they see a dormant mine in the path of the freighter, they must signal the Americans immediately. 8:58 in the morning. The 2 American helicopters hovered near the bow of the Evergrande. The wind was gusting at 40 knots. The spray from the sea made visibility nearly zero. The pilot of Raven 16 spoke to his crew. Lower the winch. We have one shot at this. If the cable snaps, we lose the tail rotor. Below them, crew members on the listing deck of the freighter scrambled to catch the line. They were terrified. They had spent the last hour watching a naval war almost begin. Now, they were the center of a desperate rescue. 9:02 in the morning. The tow line was secured. The 2 helicopters began to pull. Their engines screamed at maximum power. The massive freighter groaned. For a moment, nothing moved. The physics of 200,000 tons against 2 helicopters seemed impossible. We have tension, Raven 16 reported. She is moving. Barely. We are altering her drift by 3 degrees. In the distance, the Chinese destroyers began to back away. They were giving the freighter room. But the ocean had one more surprise. 9:05 in the morning. The lead J-15 pilot, callsign Dragon 3, banked hard over the water. He saw something the helicopters could not. Dragon 3 spoke into the open hailing frequency. American flight. This is Chinese lead. Stop. Stop your pull. There is a dormant U-6 mine directly under the hull of the freighter. It is snagged on a shipping container that fell overboard. If you pull any further, you will drag the mine into the rudder. On the bridge of the Abraham Lincoln, Miller froze. The safe dormant mines were no longer just floating. They were tangled in the wreckage of the cargo. The freighter was now a giant detonator. Raven 16, Miller shouted. Hold position. Do not pull. The helicopter pilot responded, his voice strained by the effort of the hover. Command. If I stop pulling, the swell will push the ship right over the mine anyway. We are stuck. We cannot pull, and we cannot let go. The line was vibrating like a guitar string. The tension was at the breaking point. Below the water, the mine was a dark shadow, bumping against the steel of the ship. The truce was holding, but the physics were failing. 9:15 in the morning. The churning waters of the Taiwan Strait. The tow line between the Seahawk and the Evergrande was a rigid bar of tension. Below the surface, the dark, oval shape of the U-6 mine was wedged between a twisted steel shipping container and the massive bronze rudder of the freighter. The heavy sea state was causing the container to grind against the mine's casing. Every surge of the tide brought the two objects closer together. In the cockpit of Raven 16, the pilot felt the vibration through his flight controls. It was a rhythmic, metal-on-metal thud. The pilot spoke over the joint frequency. Dragon 3. This is Raven 16. We see the snag. If I release tension, the ship drifts over the mine. If I pull, I drag the mine into the propeller. We are pinned. From the cockpit of his J-15, the Chinese pilot, Dragon 3, circled the site. He looked down at the boiling white water. He knew the internal logic of the U-6 better than anyone. Dragon 3 responded, "American pilot, listen carefully. The mine has an anti-tamper pressure sensor. If the container crushes the outer shell, it will detonate regardless of its dormant state. You must stabilize the container, not the ship." 9:17 in the morning. The flag bridge of the Abraham Lincoln. Admiral Miller watched the high-resolution feed from the helicopter's nose camera. He could see the red and white logo of the shipping company on the half-submerged container. It was acting like an anchor, dragging the mine toward the freighter's stern. Miller turned to his tactical officer. "We have an EOD team on the Higgins. Can they get a boat in that water?" The officer shook his head. "The swell is too high, sir. 8-foot waves. A rigid hull inflatable would capsize in seconds. But the Chinese have a Z-9 helicopter on the Nanchang. It has a heavy lift winch." The admiral did not hesitate. The clock was ticking in seconds, not minutes. Miller keyed the bridge-to-bridge link. "Captain Zhao, this is Miller. We cannot reach the container. Your Z-9 is closer. If your team can hook the container and lift it, my helicopters can pull the freighter clear of the mine. We have to coordinate the lift and the pull simultaneously." 9:18 in the morning. The bridge of the Nanchang. Captain Zhao looked at his executive officer. To allow a Chinese helicopter to operate directly alongside American aircraft in the middle of a live minefield was a violation of every standing order in the Eastern Theater Command. If something went wrong, it would look like an attack. If it went right, it was a miracle of seamanship. Zhao gripped the radio. "Admiral Miller, my Z-9 is launching now. They will take the high hover. Your pilots must maintain the horizontal tow. We will coordinate on the joint frequency. May the ancestors watch over us both." 9:22 in the morning. The roar of 3 different helicopter engines converged over the Evergrande. The Chinese Z-9, painted in naval gray with a red star, hovered 20 feet above the tossing waves. A Chinese diver, suspended by a thin steel cable, descended toward the half-submerged shipping container. The American pilots in Raven 16 watched the diver. He was a speck of orange against the dark green sea. The man was lowered into the freezing spray, disappearing into the foam as a wave crashed over the container. "He is in the water," the American co-pilot whispered. The Chinese diver reappeared, clinging to the metal corner of the box. With one hand, he slammed a magnetic heavy-lift hook onto the container's frame. He signaled with a thumb up. "Lift." Dragon 3 commanded from the air. The Z-9's engines climbed to a deafening whine. The cable went taut. The shipping container, filled with 20 tons of electronics, began to rise out of the water. As it lifted, the U-6 mine slid free. It bobbed on the surface, no longer pinned. "Pull!" Zhao's voice crackled over the radio. The 2 American Seahawks surged forward. The Evergrande groaned as its massive mass finally began to move. The stern of the ship cleared the mine by less than 5 meters. 9:25 in the morning. The container was dropped back into the sea, far from the ship. The Chinese diver was winched back into his cabin. The Evergrande was now drifting in clear water, away from the dormant field. The tension in the air did not vanish, but it shifted. The immediate threat of a catastrophic explosion was gone. The minefield remained, a silent and deadly barrier, but the wall had been breached by a shared necessity. Inside the Abraham Lincoln, the admiral let out a breath he had been holding for 10 minutes. He looked at the radar. The Chinese destroyers were beginning to turn. They were not fleeing. They were repositioning to a safer distance. "They are disengaging," the chief of staff said. "No," Miller replied. "They are resetting. But for today, the guns are staying cold." The morning sun finally broke through the haze, illuminating a sea filled with dormant explosives and two navies that had stared into the abyss and blinked. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The flag briefing room of the Abraham Lincoln. The room was silent. On the main screen, a frozen frame from a Seahawk camera showed the dark shape of a U-6 mine drifting away from the Evergrande. Analysts from the Office of Naval Intelligence sat at the long table. They were reviewing the data recovered from the acoustic sensors during the crisis. Admiral Miller sat at the head of the table. His coffee was cold. He had not slept in 24 hours. He looked at the lead analyst. "Tell me what we learned. Why did those mines go dormant?" The analyst adjusted his glasses. "Sir, it was not just the earthquake. The seismic event triggered a specific subroutine in the mine's software. When the acoustic energy exceeded 180 decibels, the mines were programmed to enter a safe mode. They were never meant to be a permanent blockade." Miller leaned forward. "So it was a test?" "Exactly," the analyst said. "The Chinese were testing a concept called cognitive sea denial. They wanted to see if they could use intelligent systems to paralyze a carrier strike group without ever firing a shot. The goal was psychological. They wanted us to prove to the world that we could be stopped by a software algorithm." 400 miles to the west, Beijing, the Ministry of National Defense. Captain Zhao stood before a committee of senior officers. He was no longer on the bridge of his ship. He was in a windowless room, giving his official report. A high-ranking general looked at the data on the screen. "The Americans coordinated with our helicopters. Was this authorized?" Zhao stood at attention. "No, General. It was a tactical necessity to prevent a civilian disaster and an accidental escalation. If the Evergrande had detonated that mine, both fleets would have been caught in the blast zone. Professionalism dictated the response." The general paused. He looked at the other officers. The Americans showed restraint, but they also showed they are vulnerable to undersea autonomous systems. The experiment was a success. We have mapped their acoustic response. We know how their captains react under pressure. You did well, Zhao. 3 days later, the Philippine Sea. The Abraham Lincoln was back in open water. The Taiwan Strait was behind them. On the flight deck, operations had returned to their relentless, high-speed rhythm. Jets launched and landed every 60 seconds. In his cabin, Admiral Miller wrote his final assessment for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He wrote slowly. He chose his words with care. "Modern warfare is no longer defined by the exchange of fire," Miller wrote. "It is defined by the control of the narrative and the manipulation of geography. In the Taiwan Strait, we did not win a battle. We survived a demonstration. The Chinese proved they can close the door at any time. We proved we have the skill to navigate the trap. But next time, there may not be an earthquake to save the situation." The admiral looked out his small porthole at the endless blue of the Pacific. The ocean looked the same as it had for 1,000 years. But he knew better. Beneath the surface, the machines were getting smarter. The next confrontation would not be decided by who had the biggest guns. It would be decided by who had the best code. The standoff at the Mazu Gap was over, but the silent war for the deep water was only beginning. Both nations had learned the same truth. The most advanced weapons can be stopped by something neither side controls, and whatever is watching from the depths is not finished.